Hello, it's Monday and 7 o'clock here in Athens, Georgia. And as promised, I'm starting a 3-week program, Monday to Friday, for about 10 to 20 minutes per day. I apologize for a slight slurring to my speech, but last week I had to have 2 teeth in the upper front removed, and I'm getting used to them. And tomorrow I meet with the dentist to talk about the temporary bridge and then the eventual final bridge that will replace the hole. So I will attempt to not use too many TH words and a few others that depend on those teeth. Put my nose on. Unfortunately, I'm still dealing with a couple skin cancers on my nose, so it tends to make me look like some kind of drunkard from a bar or a pub. But seeing I don't drink alcohol, that doesn't fit either. Anyway, let's get to it. My plan is this. This book, which I did several years ago, it's available, still some paperback. It's available actually in foreign languages more than in English right now. But it is available from me in 3 different electronic forms if you want to get the whole book. And we'll deal with that later. But this book was set up in 3 sections. First section is you or me. Second section is the people we work with. The tools and techniques that we can use to develop creative thinking. And the third section is how can we, as parents, supervisors, managers, bosses, whatever term we have, how can we help develop the creative thinking in other people? All right, first of all, definitions. Creativity is one of those words that has hundreds, if not thousands, of definitions. A good friend of mine, Andy Alenikov from Russia, who's been in America and a citizen for many years, put together a book several years ago, 101 Definitions of Creativity, and he just touched the tip of the iceberg. So I go with what Paul Torrance, who had been my teacher for several years and eventually my friend and colleague, his working definition was that creative thinking is the generation or discovery of new, novel, unique, unusual, not seen before ideas. Now, there are ways to stretch that if you want. Some people, more in academia than necessarily in the workplace, say new, novel, unique ideas that can be applied in a practical way. My only problem with that is, having worked in 8 different creative fields, sometimes you need the impractical ideas, the wild ideas, the silly ideas that will lead you to the more serious ideas. So the idea that all creative thinking should lead to only creative ideas that have direct application, I think, actually does more damage than good. So, Broken Crayons. Why the title? My art teacher, Mrs. Johnson, taught us many years ago, back in the 50s, to take our crayons out of our boxes, take the wrappers off, and break them. And then she proceeded over the weeks of the semester to show us many different ways, or to encourage us to discover our own ways of using broken crayons as what they really were or are, and that's resource. The analogy I use of the metaphor of broken crayons is that you look at whatever it is you have as the ultimate resource that it really is. A wax crayon is colored wax. The wax is there to keep the color together. The color goes on to other surfaces. When you change medium, you don't have wax, obviously. But if all you have is a straight crayon with a wrapper, you're limited to what you can do with it. But when you remove the wrapper, now you can make thin lines with one end, a little thicker line with the other end, or very wide lines with the side. All right. First chapter, as I mentioned earlier, the premise of this minutes that we are going to be together in this session is that we are creative. We were born with capacities to be creative. But cultures have a tendency, because they believe in conformity is what controls them, that tends to kill creativeness. It's hard to conform and be creative at the same time. So what I'm recommending is that you do one at one time and one at another time. It takes different thinking processes. So the first thing I did is I gave homework, which you may have seen or may not. It appears on my Facebook page, and I will attach it as a link to this video. These 32 traits. They're based on a study I did in 1980, looking at the traits of creative people based on experts in psychology and in academia. I looked at articles. Nowadays we could do it with an easy Google search, but that time I had to use Reader's Guide to periodic literature and book catalogs and so forth. But I went through and collected articles from almost 500 authors, researchers, professors, copied down all the traits they listed that they felt were found in highly creative people. And then I started to see there were a pattern. Obviously, I didn't have my 7 habits of highly creative people, which I kind of fantasized for. But in reality, I had these 400 and some traits. But some of them, only one person mentioned it. Some 2 or 3 mentioned it. But what I found was there's always a pattern there somewhere, if you look. And that's a trait of certain types of highly creative people, is they see patterns. I looked for a pattern. I gave the arbitrary number of 5, like the fingers on a hand. What are 5 traits? Or not 5 traits. What are traits that at least 5 experts agreed on? And the 32 I have on the sheet that are explained in detail in the chapter 1 are those. And ever since 1980, I have used that as an exercise for finding what I call crayon breakers. People who go out of their way. The cliches are off the box, out of the wall, out of the corner and so forth. There's hundreds and hundreds of those. Those are what I call people who tend to be naturally creative. They have not been stopped. They have not been forced to conform so much that they've lost it. Torrance did studies with children from kindergarten up. In fact, he did a longitudinal study that went as far as 50 years with some of his original kindergartners from Minnesota. But he found something unique. By the 4th grade, most of the kids that he had tested for creative thinking abilities as kindergartners, most of them no longer scored that well. He did more studies, because one of the things I learned from him when it came to research is you don't do one study of 20, you do 20 studies of 20, or maybe 50 studies of 20, or 100 studies of 20, and then look for the patterns, look for the tendencies, look for where the research is indicating there is a commonality to the studies. And human studies are expensive, especially if you're trying to represent an entire population. So, he started with 4, long before I did mine or all those 400 and some writers did their work. He started with 4. He found that highly creative people tended to be very fluent, which is a psychological term he meant to use to represent they come up with lots of ideas. Not just 1 or 2 or 3. They come up with 12, 24, 144. They are what would be naturally called brainstormers. Second is they tend to be flexible. their ideas are not all basically the same or adaptations of the same. They're from different perspectives. One of the quick ways I do that, and I'll use it in a later session, is what I call alphabetizing, where I have people or groups list professions or occupations or jobs, A to Z, architect, baker, consultant, dentist, educator, financial person, and so forth. And then I have them take turns trying to think as if one of those at a time. How would they solve a particular problem? Looking at 26 different points of view or different professional perspectives. That would generate flexibility and fluency. Third one is he discovered that people tend to be very freewheeling and do lots, their ideas can be fairly original at least to them, if not the whole group. And last, they also tend to elaborate. I'm mixing up theories in my head. They elaborate, they see detail. When they draw a picture, you look at it and go, oh, that's X. But if you ask them to explain the picture, you find out they can go on in paragraphs explaining what the picture is. They also, some elaborate in the area of drawings, words, emotions, not just in particular words. So, I'm going to share a few in the next few minutes, double checking my time. All right, I have about 4 minutes. Out of the 32, what I recommend to people do is to look at the 32, say which ones are me, which ones do I benefit from, which ones are becoming detriments. Are they a problem source, like always seeing possibilities when others don't? Sometimes that can get you into trouble. You're too independent, or you're always focusing on the future when people want answers now. Those can have benefits and detriments. So what I recommend to people is to look at which traits they feel are them, then put them in order of importance to them, and then look at ones, what benefit would they achieve by having one or more of the others? If they were more curious, if they perceived the world differently, if they tended to be idealistic at times and not always realistic or pragmatic. So by having them look at that, I can do different exercises to develop that. What I find in idea generating sessions that people often use the word brainstorming as a generic term. Brainstorming is one type of idea generating technique, and I will talk about that in another session. But one of the things I also learned from Paul Torrance was he learned that people need to warm up their brain, warm up their creativeness, warm up their humor, warm up, you name it, any aspect of humanness or human activity. You'll discover that the people who are at the tops at that, comedians, athletes, scientists, inventors, is they have their own ways of warming up, getting their mind ready, getting the mood ready. And there are mental, physical, emotional, social ways you can do that. There are visual ways to do it. There's auditory ways you can do it. Some people like to work to music. Other people prefer absolute silence. And still others, myself, I prefer the sound of nature. Unfortunately, I live too close to a busy road, so the idea of the sound of nature comes and goes for me. Years ago, and this is where I'm going to end for this session, I came up with this, Alan's Creating Challenges. And I started in 1997. If you visited the Yahoo page or one of my websites, you can see these things. they were called creativity challenges originally, is that each week I would send out a challenge for people to work on for 10 or 15 minutes each day for practice. For instance, the very first one was focused on fluency. It was to take what were called the audio cassette plastic boxes or containers, cases, and come up with new uses for them, other than what they were made for. Some people use paper clips, some use rubber bands, variety of things. The idea is to cause yourself or the group or team to come up with multiple possibilities other than what they're normally used for. And that can be a good warm-up. Well, during that year in '97 when I started doing this, I ended up developing 52 of these, and they're all available on my website. You can take a look at it. Eventually, I did them for 18 years until the end of 2014. I believe you can see that. That's the website you want to go to. Or go to creating.com and then go up in the search box and type in challenges and you'll find it. Or this, creating.com/cc/index.shtml. I appreciate it. I see I've got Bob Middlesdorf. Hi, Bob. Good to see you. And Tay Zongsheng Daniel. Daniel. Hi, Daniel. And Myra from Atlanta. Glad you joined me. I hope you got something out of this first section. Next day, tomorrow I'll go to chapter 2. Goes into a slightly different topic, then 3, 4, and so forth, until we wrap up the whole book. And I see Eric has joined me. Good to see you all. But I'm going to sign off now. And the more I do these, the more polished they'll get, the more they'll be like my workshops and seminars that I've done for several years. And these are like micro or mini workshops. Bye-bye, folks. Nikki and I say goodbye.